And first up, we have Nick Zabriskie, who is the Public Policy Associate for the East Coast for Uber Technologies Incorporated. And then we have Katie Kincaid, who is Government Relations Manager for Lyft Incorporated. We have Ray Middleman Esquire, who is the Yellow Cab Company of Pennsylvania Incorporated, or Yellow X. And then we have Joshua Friedman, who is with CabbyGo. And with that, Mr. Zabriskie, please proceed with your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Paulson, Vice Chairman Coleman, Commissioner Cawley, Commissioner Whitmer, and Commissioner Brown. My name is Nick Zabriskie. I'm the Public Policy Associate for the East Coast for Uber Technologies Incorporated. I'll just say, even though I'm coming from out of town, I'm a 2009 Penn State grad, so I'm happy to be back in the Commonwealth. I wanted to thank you for the invitation to testify today on rapid changes that are occurring in the transportation industry as a result of technology advances. My remarks today will focus on the growing need for transportation alternatives throughout Pennsylvania and how establishing modern-day rules for transportation network companies that promote competition and customer choice can help meet these needs while ensuring driver integrity, vehicle safety, and increased consumer protection. Uber offers a variety of different products in the various cities and countries in which we operate, but most of my testimony today pertains to UberX, which is our version of a product that's been commonly called ride-sharing. Uber and our technologies do a lot of things, but when it comes to transporting people, our UberX app connects riders with drivers operating private vehicles with the touch of a button. Whether it's stepping out to run errands, finding a safe way home after an evening out, or a way to get to the doctor's office, Pennsylvanians are demanding safe, reliable, and affordable alternatives to get from point A to point B. A benefit of ride sharing that may be of particular interest to Pennsylvania is its impact on DUI rates. Pennsylvania has one of the highest number of DUI fatalities in the country, and data suggests that when Uber enters a market, DUIs actually decrease. In support of this, in Seattle, we found a causal relationship between the arrival of Uber and roughly 10% decline in DUI rates. And in Philadelphia, where we operate Uber Black, and in Pittsburgh, where it's UberX, a huge percentage of Uber's requests come late on weekend nights when DUIs peak, with predictable spikes in requests just after the 2 a.m. bar closing times. Reliability is also enhanced by ride sharing. So in every market that UberX has entered, wait times for rides have fallen, especially in traditionally underserved neighborhoods, meaning that transportation is becoming more reliable. In addition, the UberX platform is creating entrepreneurial opportunities for thousands of our partners, so folks like parents, grad students, people between jobs, anybody who really wants to be their own boss. And they use our platform to create their own small businesses. And recent findings put the number of jobs created by Uber at roughly 20,000 per month, 20,000, per month. As a new service model, ride-sharing was not previously contemplated by Pennsylvania regulations and likewise is not cleanly captured under the current regulatory framework. Uber supports new regulations for ride-sharing that promote consumer choice, innovation, and increased economic opportunities. Uber's promise to our customers is a safe, reliable, and seamless transportation experience. And to that end, drivers that partner with Uber undergo rigorous background checks. Pennsylvania vehicles that operate on our platform are inspected, and trips are covered by primary commercial liability insurance. And UberX trips set the standard for consumer protection with transparent prices, comprehensive trip receipts, and the highest level of accountability between riders and drivers, thanks to feedback surveys requested at the end of every trip. We believe it's appropriate to formally incorporate these types of standards into regulations to satisfy public safety concerns. In our experience, an effective way to address these concerns while still promoting consumer choice and opportunity is by way of a transportation network company model, where a TNC applies for appropriate licenses with the state and certifies that they and their partners are in compliance with state requirements, establishing minimum protection thresholds, including safety and insurance. In my written testimony, I've laid out driver integrity, vehicle safety, and consumer safety best practices that Uber uses as an industry leader in this space. And should the PUC decide to examine a TNC-style regulatory model, we would suggest that the Commission consider these best practice areas as proven ways to ensure safety and consumer satisfaction. And in conclusion, ride-sharing is much demanded and much needed transportation alternative in the Commonwealth. Increasing transportation options will have tremendous positive impacts for Pennsylvanians, both in terms of increased ease in getting from point A to point B, but also in the economic freedom and flexibility that it will unlock for prospective drivers and local business owners. Uber believes that updates to the current regulatory structure are needed to provide a safe home for ride-sharing in Pennsylvania, and we're confident that it is possible to create a regulatory environment that can achieve public safety concerns while still promoting consumer choice. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kincaid.
Good morning, Chairman Paulson, Vice Chair Coleman, Honorable Commissioners. My name is Katie Kincaid, and I'm a Government Relations Manager with Lyft. Thank you very much for having us this morning. My testimony today will provide an overview of Lyft's services and the company's vision for enhancing transportation options for Pennsylvania's communities. I will also review Lyft's compliance with existing Pennsylvania regulations and the company's objections for working with the Commission to develop appropriate refinements to improve the availability of safe and effective Transportation Network Company, TNC, service in Pennsylvania. Under the ETA authority granted for Allegheny County, Lyft currently operates a peer-to-peer ride-sharing network using digital software to facilitate transactions between passengers and ride-sharing operators using their own vehicles to provide transportation. The purpose, of course, is to enhance access to transportation alternatives, supplement existing public transportation, and reduce single occupancy vehicle trips, as well as vehicle ownership and usage, while assisting Pennsylvania in reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Lyft is a TNC, which refers to a company offering a software application that allows individuals seeking transportation to connect with qualified drivers. This is an innovative form of prearranged transportation accessible through a mobile software application that is available both on an Apple, iOS, and Android. The need and public necessity for this service is clear. Existing prearranged and on-demand transportation services rely only on full-time professional drivers, unnecessarily limiting the scope of authorized services available to meet fluctuating consumer demand for transportation. This is a very important point because all too often Lyft is viewed solely as an alternate to taxi cab service or public transportation. In reality, Lyft is intended to be an alternative to vehicle ownership altogether. Many consumers expend tremendous resources on personal vehicle ownership and maintenance. Specifically, owning and operating a vehicle is the second highest U.S. household expense at $9,000 per year. As Lyft's platform proliferates, consumers in many markets may be able to forego personal vehicle ownership because Lyft can fill the transportation gaps left by existing transportation services. Ride sharing, where non-professionals with vehicles provide rides to friends, neighbors, and consumer casual acquaintances, is nothing new. Consumers have engaged in ride sharing for many decades, utilizing such low-tech forums such as office carpooling lists, commuter pickup lines, and employer and community ride boards. The benefits of low-cost ride sharing are clear and unmistakable. Ride-sharing reduces single-occupancy vehicle trips while providing tremendous social benefits, including enhanced access to transportation and reductions in traffic congestion and greenhouse gas emissions. As with all new innovation or variance from traditional and long-standing practices, concerns regarding the applicability of existing regulations exist. While Lyft's service differs from traditional motor carrier services, the company understands that effective regulation is key to expanding Lyft's service in a safe and responsible manner. To that end, Lyft strives to work with regulators to develop regulatory oversight appropriate for ride-sharing services, including insurance requirements. The majority of Lyft drivers spend less than 15 hours per week driving for the platform. These are not full-time professional drivers. Additionally, drivers using Lyft's platform do not drive in search of street hails and only receive ride requests using the mobile application. Such differences should be considered by regulators in determining what regulatory structures should be applicable to TNCs. Lyft supports the PUC's interest in driver integrity and vehicle safety. As a PUC-certified entity, Lyft is responsible for providing a durable record of each trip completed through the platform, including the identity of the passenger and driver, a photographer of the vehicle, and the description of each trip. This includes the time and location of origination and destination and GPS record of the route taken. Lyft also is responsible for obtaining criminal background and driving history checks for all individual drivers offering service through the Lyft platform. In addition to background checks, Lyft has a zero tolerance for drugs and alcohol, and drivers must meet all standards for a qualified driver as set forth by the Commission regulations. Drivers who fail to meet each and every one of the foregoing requirements cannot qualify as a Lyft driver. Lyft also performs vehicle inspections and submits to the PUC's authority to inspect vehicle operation under the PUC regulations. Under the ETA authority granted by the Commission, Lyft further offers insurance coverage exceeding the PUC insurance guidelines set forth in Chapter 32 of PUC regulations. As the Commission considers updating its transportation regulations, Lyft encourages communication with affected companies, particularly as it relates to rules and regulations that would affect the burgeoning TNC service in Pennsylvania. For example, while Lyft recognizes the importance of vehicle safety, Lyft cautions the Commission against implementing unreasonable age or mileage restrictions for vehicles used in conjunction with TNC service. Additionally, the Commission should ensure that enforcement of any TNC regulation is carried out in a manner respectful to the reality that drivers using Lyft's platform are non-professional members of the public. Thank you for the opportunity to testify here today. On behalf of Lyft, we greatly look forward to serving Pennsylvania communities effectively and safely. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kincaid. Mr. Middleman.
In its May 2014 order granting authority to Yellow Cab, Yellow X has complied with all Commission requirements, including the provision of insurance, a vehicle inspection program, a driver qualification program, and other regulations as set forth in Title 52 of the Pennsylvania Code. Yellow X is proof that TNC service can exist and operate within regulatory guidelines which were established in a cooperative effort between Yellow Cab and the Commission. We are appreciative of the thoughtful and expeditious manner in which the Commission acted to hear our concerns and help craft guidelines to effectuate a safe and responsible program for TNC operations. We would hope and expect that the May 2014 order of this Commission would serve as the template for any further certificates of public convenience to be granted to any other TNC entities. It is important to Yellow Cab as a demand and response common carrier service provider for over 100 years to bring regulated, safe service to the public. We view Yellow X and all TNCs as the natural progression of demand and response passenger service. When it began service in 1913, Yellow Cab drivers would stand at a call box on a street corner waiting for a call for service. This progressed eventually to radio dispatch, then digital dispatch, GPS guided dispatch, and now app and internet dispatch. We view the app and internet dispatch method as simply the latest evolution of a better, faster means of communication between passenger and service provider. While much attention has been drawn to the use of apps and the internet as part of TNC service, we believe the true innovation which TNC companies bring to the demand and response marketplace is the use of personal vehicles by drivers who are most likely to be weekend warriors and not professional drivers. The upside of this innovation is that it provides a means whereby the public demand for service, which changes day to day, can be met without an enormous and economically disastrous capital expenditure by existing carriers. The downside of using the non-professional driver, of course, is that there are greater concerns regarding public safety and welfare, which are now significantly more difficult to resolve and address. We are pleased that the Commission has had the foresight to permit Yellow X to bring the same safety regulations and insurance requirements as have existed in traditional taxi service to bear on its TNC operations. We want our TNC passengers to know that they are in a vehicle that has been checked for mechanical soundness, that the driver has been vetted and is a lawful person with a good driving record, and that there is primary insurance coverage for passenger, driver, and others in the event of an accident. We believe that these traditional components of demand and response common carrier service cannot be diluted, ignored, or abrogated. They are the gravamen of safe public transportation. To be certain, Yellow X, which became certificated 28 days ago and had its tariff approved at that time, has actually had drivers from other uncertificated TNC companies bring their vehicles to Yellow X for mechanical inspection in preparation to be put into Yellow X service. The first two such vehicles which Yellow X inspected failed the mechanical inspection process. We are pleased to have caught such deficiencies, yet concerned that TNC companies operating outside the purview of the PUC don't have the safety of the public as their first concern. The Commission requirements and oversight of the Commission are essential to ensure that safe public transportation exists. Yellow X is not afraid of competition from other TNC demand and response carriers, but there must be a level playing field. Rules and regulations governing TNC service must be enforced uniformly and fairly. We believe that all demand and response carriers must comply with the driver regulations at PA Code Chapter 29.501 through 29.509, and all demand and response carriers must comply with 52 PA Code Chapter 29.401 to 29.407. All demand and response carriers must comply with primary insurance as per 52 PA Code Section 32.11. With respect to the adequacy of the present insurance requirements as set forth at 52 PA Code 32.11 and clarified in 52 PA Code 41.21, we believe that the Commission must be mindful of the significant cost of premiums related to the provision of insurance on commercial vehicles. A significant increase in coverage could have a deleterious impact on the ability of many demand and response carriers to invest in technology and TNC fleet maintenance and care. An increase in premiums could put many smaller carriers out of business. We also believe that the need requirement as set forth in 52 PA Code 41.14 should be maintained, as will be addressed by Mr. Lagasse of the National Taxi Cab Limousine and Paratransit Association. Essential deregulation or open entry into the demand and response common carrier marketplace has been a predictable recipe for disaster everywhere it has been attempted. Yellow X favors regulation and regulatory oversight for public safety. Yellow X is pleased to have had this opportunity to appear before the Commission and to have had a hand in developing the new evolution of a necessary and valuable public utility. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Middleman. Mr. Freeman?
Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you for the Commission to having me here today. My name is Joshua Friedman. I'm the CEO of CabbyGo. I'm a Pennsylvania voter, a lifelong resident of Pennsylvania, and I went to Pitt. We launched New Year's Eve last year in Pittsburgh. We offer a free technology tool for existing carriers. So if you're a licensed carrier in the state of Pennsylvania, you can join our app and you can compete against other carriers for ride requests in your service area. Our minimum viable product, we launched on New Year's Eve, and it was originally with push a button, get a ride functionality. Basically, the most simple application that we could have. And we did really well our first night. We did about 30 rides on New Year's Eve, and that was using licensed carriers. It was a good start. It was very surprising, and considering our app was so clunky in January, we had a lot of issues, and we were very satisfied about what happened. We've since done a steady 5 or 10 rides a day. It's been continually adding and enlarging in our market. And we recently launched our patent-pending bidding system a few weeks ago that ensures that a ride request will be proposed to multiple carriers and bid on by those carriers using their approved rates that you have approved for them. This framework and the business model that I built was intentionally set up this way to be legally compliant, specifically legally compliant with the laws of the state of Pennsylvania. CabbyGo we only use licensed carriers in the system, and we're not compensated by the rider or the driver for arranging the ride. I did this because I used to be a licensed mortgage broker, and I knew that in the state of Pennsylvania, if I ever did a loan without a license, I would have my head handed to me, and I wanted to be in compliance with the PUC. That's why I was kind of surprised when the PUC just gave a slap on the wrist to Uber and Lyft, and then to top it off, they continue to do business in violation of a state court order, and they're basically ignoring the laws of the state. And I just felt like this was unfair to carriers and the people that play within the rules of the law in the state of Pennsylvania. You're kind of sending a message that if you do approve a special type of license, you're saying that, or at least just the message I think you're portraying to the carriers is that if you have money and you come to the state of Pennsylvania, you can influence the politics. I'm not asking for an era of protectionism. I'm only asking that you enforce the laws that you already have on the books. And I'm providing free technology tools for existing carriers to compete against each other and to improve their service in the state of Pennsylvania. I'm just asking that you do your job with a level of fairness that instills faith in a system that was designed to serve Pennsylvania residents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Friedman. Questions from the commissioners?
Yeah, I'd like to now recognize Commissioner Brown for purposes of her questions. Commissioner Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank all of you for coming today to testify. I do have what I consider to be a very important question in light of the fact that we're looking at these new entities out there, TNCs, and the fact that most people have said that there's a need, there is a gap in terms of taxi service, especially around the city of Pittsburgh. I am a proud Pitt grad, and I do love your Pitt tie that you have on, even though you're a Penn State grad. And I noticed that when I was in school there in Pittsburgh, there were some concerns of whether or not we were going to be able to get a taxi cab ride home after a night out on the town. And so I say to all of you that are sitting here, especially those that are here representing the TNC companies, have you tried to address some of those issues? I know that the Hill District, East Liberty, some of those areas in the city, there is a great deal of concern of whether or not you're going to be able to get a taxi cab either there or home from areas such as there.
Katie Kincaid from Lyft. It is our desire to serve all communities that currently face gaps in transportation. And one way that we try to do that is to really make our service, make the platform known to those communities, and to try to recruit drivers from all different communities, so that the idea is that when you need that moment at that exact moment, or when you need a ride at that exact moment, that there is somebody there who can help you, a member of your community. So absolutely. I mean, I think that we really strive to get as many people involved as possible. Our vision in this, we say that this is kind of chapter one of a 100 chapter novel. And our vision for this in the future is that someday this is really a transportation framework in which everybody participates, whether it be through our platform, another, or I'm sure others to come. And that what you're really then creating is a fabric and that layers on top and works with existing transportation options, so that people do become less reliant on even driving themselves home or driving themselves to where they need to go. And as a part of that, to get to that stage, you need to get as many people to participate as possible.
And I would just echo what Katie has said. From our perspective, going to your point, our technology was conceived of and developed to specifically meet the kinds of demands that you're talking about. When you are out and you need to have a reliable way to get home, there's nothing better than being able to pull out your phone, press a button, have somebody come and pick you up, and they're willing to do that because they know they have a guaranteed fare. So I echo and associate myself with what Katie said there, but that's precisely what our goal is, to be available on every corner, whenever and wherever, and that's what we strive to do at Uber.
Madam Commissioner, on behalf of Yellow X, it would be our position, of course, to service any and all areas in our certificated territory. One of the endemic problems that you have in many operating areas is jitney service, especially in the city of Pittsburgh. It's been a traditional service that's been there. We have, over the years, worked with the district attorney's office and other governmental agencies to try to improve service in those areas. What has transpired, I think, which has been alluded to earlier, is that the city has become bigger, safer, and younger in some respects. And so it would be our position that we will continue, Yellow X will continue, and hopefully expand on the service that's been provided by traditional taxi service. But I think that there certainly is a need to continue those efforts. The reality of the situation is that while you can draw up certain things you'd like to accomplish on paper, sometimes the implementation is a little more difficult than you would like it to be. I think the important thing is that we're moving forward to try to solve those problems, and that's the intention of certainly Yellow X and Yellow Cab.
Hi, my name is Joshua Friedman with CabbyGo. You had mentioned it might be difficult to get a ride from the Hill. The reason why I wrote this app was actually because I missed half a baseball game, a Pirate game in Pittsburgh, and I was unable to get a ride in the location I was at. I don't know if you're aware, but Uber and Lyft, I think, have dynamic pricing, and dynamic pricing allows carriers to make, or it allows the carriers to compete against each other in the state of Pennsylvania, but I don't think carriers like taxi companies are able to change the rates. That would help solve these problems of areas that don't have coverage if the carriers could make more money in those areas. So that's something I think that you should think about. And also, something that's maybe doesn't answer your question directly, but the future of all this is autonomous vehicles, and the decisions you make now are going to have a huge impact on that. So in answer to your question, what are we doing to serve underserved areas? The ability of my app to have multiple carriers compete against each other allows riders to get the best deal possible. And I think more competition in the state of Pennsylvania is always a great answer to your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one more question, and that was, I heard several of you talk about, these drivers are they're not professional drivers. They're the weekend drivers. And I just wanted to make sure I had an understanding of what you consider to be non-professional versus professional. Is that just that they're full-time versus part-time, or is there other type of training involved here? Just something to give clarification to that statement.
Yes, Madam Commissioner, the point when we use the term weekend warrior, in the taxi industry that exists presently in the city, and there's 6 certificated carriers who operate in the city of Pittsburgh. Most of those drivers are folks that either lease or operate a cab, 24-hour lease or a week-long lease. Those are folks that make their primary living driving a taxi cab. The training envisioned by Yellow X, frankly, would be the same training that any of those drivers, the full-time drivers, would receive. So it was Yellow X's concern to make sure that the drivers are vetted properly and trained and acclimated to provide service in the same fashion. So, the weekend warrior, part of what we are aiming to do here is to address the expansion and contraction of the marketplace. When you have a convention, when you have a Steeler game, when you have weekends, the city can probably do just fine with 300 service providers during the course of the week. But on Friday, you could use 600. And that's really one of the things that TNCs are going to help the city address. And I think but safety is really the main concern.
And I would just add that, as I alluded to in my testimony, UberX, what we're doing is we are taking a system, we're bringing on folks, anybody that, it wants to make a little bit of money on the side, somebody that wants to work part-time. If they approach us and they want access to our technology platform, then we thoroughly vet them. They go through background checks, and if they can produce, a license and prove that they have insurance and that their vehicle's inspected, then we allow them to gain access to this. And that's one of the major sources of the growth that we've had, is we're meeting these demands.
And if I may, just echoing Nick, Lyft has very similar rigorous background checks, DMV checks, car inspections to be able to participate. But I think that if you asked most of our drivers, who are you, what do you do, they would respond that they're teachers, they're parents, they're nurses, they're, construction workers. And Lyft is, what they do on the side on a supplemental basis. So all of the standards are still very much there to make sure that they are capable and safe to help provide these transportation options to members of their communities. But this is not what they do on a full-time basis.
Thank you. But I would emphasize to you that sometimes the use of the term non-professional drivers, the average layperson would then question whether or not they're safe drivers, and that is the key here for us, that they're safe drivers. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Brown. I'd like to now recognize Commissioner Cawley for purposes of his questions. Commissioner Cawley.
Well, again, first of all, thank you all for coming. I'm deliberately not going to ask Uber or Lyft any questions because we have pending before us very hotly contested on-the-record proceedings regarding their applications for permanent authority. I would respond to you, Mr. Friedman, when you say that you are offended by the illegal behavior. I said earlier that I reluctantly voted for emergency temporary authority. I did so because of just what you're describing. The reason I voted for them was twofold. There were two reasons. One, my respect for the legislators who were here previously, who need some time to get legislation in place, despite the fact that these carriers insist on operating despite our order not to. I voted for it also because as a condition of continuing to operate, they had to abide by the insurance requirements that we placed in our order, and both have. Now, whether those insurance requirements are adequate, we'll see. But I'm glad that there is a growing competitive market in Pittsburgh, and that you're part of it.
Thank you.
Mr. Middleton, I agree with you that there's nothing new here except what you've described. This is nothing more than an improvement on radio dispatch. And the real innovation is the use of personal cars with amateur drivers. And I must say that it gives me some pause that these people may be good drivers, and they may know their way around Pittsburgh and other places, but maybe they aren't good drivers, and maybe they don't know their way around Pittsburgh. But frankly, that could be true of taxi drivers as we now have them. I would like to ask you about the need requirement. You mentioned in your testimony that the abolition of the need requirement has proved disastrous elsewhere. Shall I wait for Mr. Lagasse to elaborate, or can you help us with what you meant?
Well, I'd certainly rather defer to Mr. Lagasse's knowledge on the subject is significantly greater than mine, but I can at least give you the concept that open entry and deregulation. I apologize for deregulation and open entry into the marketplace, certainly in the taxi world, in Washington, D.C., and in other venues, has resulted in poor service, taxi fleets that have been depleted and run down, and higher fares, a lot of different problems. And almost uniformly, any geographic area that is deregulated has gone back to regulation within several years after deregulating. So, when we talk about need for service, I have to agree with, I think it was Senator Fontana, that it is not inappropriate. It's actually, I think, advisable to have, protestable issues and to have at least some criteria for entering the marketplace and to demonstrate the need for service. And I think that's part of the regulatory oversight that the Commission, I think, is, if you will, obligated to provide.
Well, let me put a little finer point on it then. As I understand the need requirement as it has existed for centuries, really, but certainly for decades in Pennsylvania, it was a requirement that a proposed provider of utility service demonstrate that there are those who want the service and therefore there's a need for it. The problem is, as I've understood it historically, is that if you let too many competitors into a market, it may lead to ruinous competition, meaning to compete, they must cut their prices to the point where they're making little or no profit, and therefore they cut back on such things as paying for their insurance premiums and new tires and new brakes and new vehicles and clean vehicles, to the point where the service is poor for everyone and nobody can make any money and the public is jeopardized. Now, I think that's what Mr. Lagasse may tell me and what you're trying to tell us. And the danger if we abolish the need requirement is we may let too many competitors into the marketplace in Pittsburgh and elsewhere, and then no one can make any money. Now, it may not apply, though, in this situation where personal vehicles are being used, where if individual drivers can't make any money, they just won't continue to use their personal cars to try to make money. But on the other hand, maybe they will. Maybe they need the money and it isn't necessarily a part-time business and they're really doing it full-time, and maybe they'll let their personal cars lapse into decay.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Commissioner, to some extent, and I would defer to Mr. Lagasse to follow up, but you've got the gist of it for certain.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cawley. Now I'd like to recognize Commissioner Whitmer for purposes of her questions. Commissioner Whitmer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to follow up on the need requirement. That is something that we are here to talk about all of our transportation regulations and not necessarily just on certain aspects of it. Need is one aspect that I think that is very important that we take a look at. If I were to perhaps agree that need is something that is still necessary, should it be more of a fitness requirement than an anti-competition requirement? And for anyone who could.
If I may, I think, again, I would defer to Mr. Lagasse, but the fitness issue, I think, is the primary concern. Financial fitness, the fitness to operate safely within the existing rules of the Commission. I think those are, is the public safe? That's the primary charge of this Commission, as I think we would all agree. Need for service, the reality of it has been that the Commission has, on the taxi side, on the demand and response side of transportation, has not denied an application on the basis of need in Western Pennsylvania in quite some time. In the 28 years I've been doing this work, I don't believe it's ever denied an application for service, except I think when somebody didn't have witnesses to show up. So I think that the commission, the ALJs, have the ability to, under the existing regulations, to kind of figure out what need is and what it should be and how to define it. And I think that one of the things that the commission needs to do as part of these proceedings is to put a little body behind what some of these terms mean. Financial fitness, for example. What is it? Is it if you have $5,000 in the bank, $2,000, or $100,000? What constitutes need? If you bring 2 witnesses to a hearing, is that enough, or do you need to bring 20 witnesses? Do you need to have a study, a demographic study, to determine that the services are necessary? I think those are the kinds of things that Yellow X would like to see going forward to help the commission make determinations. I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
Anyone else like to elaborate on your thoughts on the potential anti-competition elements of need versus a fitness requirement?
Candidly, I don't know if I would be appropriate to speak specifically to the statute as it stands now or the possibility of it moving forward. I think I would just simply say that since Lyft has come into existence, we are now in over 65 cities across the United States, including Pittsburgh. And I think that demonstrates a couple of things, but one thing that really fundamentally demonstrates is that across the board in cities across the United States, there is a fundamental need for additional forms of alternate transportation, and that this is something that the people have really taken hold of. And certainly in Allegheny County and Pittsburgh, we have seen that. So I can only speak to what we have seen through our community, and there certainly seems to be a tremendous need there.
And I would just add that when you consider, we have a similar growth history, and when you consider when UberX enters into the marketplace, we have data that shows that we're not taking away rides from other carriers. We're actually growing the whole entire pie, as people, I think some of the legislators on the previous panel mentioned this, but as we come into the marketplace, the actual options for transportation increase, and people tend to find themselves using more and more transportation options. So I myself, for example, I work for Uber. That doesn't keep me from using taxis when I step out onto the street. If I need a street hail and they're readily available, I'm going to take that. If I have a little more time or the weather is bad, then I might use Uber instead. So we really view this as growing the entire pie and not a competition issue. And then a good way to kind of think about the services that we provide, we're a technology company, and we provide services that are kind of akin to an Orbitz, where we create this marketplace that matches consumer need with people that are willing to provide those services. And so going a little bit to your point, Commissioner Cawley, when there's a marketplace such as this and competition can work and supply and demand can work, what you see is those things converging. And so from our standpoint, competition is a good thing that helps out consumers, creates more choice for everyone, and more economic opportunities for drivers.
One more question.
Sure.
Mr. Middleman, Yellow X leases its vehicles, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so if I read your testimony correctly, you had indicated that really the only difference between TNCs and traditional taxis is the use of personal vehicles?
Yes, I mean that's.
So Yellow X really isn't a TNC?
It is a TNC to the extent that it is people's personal vehicles that they're operating.
But you're leasing them?
We lease them from them to be sure that we comply with the self-insurance requirements and the commission's requirements, frankly, that we have an interest in the vehicle that's being covered. So that's the mechanism to ensure that the self-insurance program is effective.
Okay, so you're leasing the vehicles. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Whitmer. I'd like to recognize Vice Chairman Coleman for purposes of his questions. Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you to all of our panelists for coming this morning. I just wanted to start with a comment to you, Mr. Middleman, and to your company, and I want to commend you. I want to commend your team for working with our transportation professionals through an application process, and in fact, as I understand it, it is the Yellow X application that served as the model going forward for other TNCs. So I just wanted to publicly commend you and your team for working with our professionals in that regard.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
I wanted to circle back to Commissioner Brown's comment on availability of service, and I just want to make sure I understand for a TNC company that you are relying upon drivers to provide that service, to open an app and to be available to provide service. So how do you guarantee that those drivers are available or service is available 24/7 in all geography within the area that you're certificated?
I would say it is in our best interest as a company to promote and do the very best that we can to help ensure that there are as many drivers available in as many places as much of the time as possible. And we do try to do that. We do try to develop on the back end tools that help drivers know kind of where the hot spots are, where there's a peaks in demand, and where kind of there is demand. But these are everyday people in their own vehicles who choose to participate as much or as little as they wish. And so we don't want to impose upon them requirements of, you have to be doing this at this very specific time. Because, as I mentioned before, these are people who are doing this on a supplemental basis. So a mother who I've recently met who had previously been a baker and started driving recently as a driver for Lyft liked it because when I got a ride from her, it was the evening. Her kids had already gone to sleep, and her husband was at home with those kids. And she loved it precisely because of this, because of the flexibility in her previous job. She had to be up at 5 a.m. baking and doing this stuff. So these are our drivers, and to say to them, you have to be here at this exact time or during this time, it fundamentally changes the model. That said, as I mentioned previously, it is in our best interest and to try to achieve the vision as I laid out before, and which this is something that everyone participates in, to get to that moment where we are still, it does become a 24-hour service that is serving all these areas because so many people are participating.
Yeah, just to dovetail with that, like I said before, a good way to think of our company is kind of like in orbits. We create a marketplace. People log in and they say, I need a ride. And so when a driver is on the system, they can see that they have a guaranteed fare. As soon as they accept that ride, they can go and pick that person up. So they cover the whole gamut of whatever market that we're in. It's because of the demand for our services that we're able to provide reliability across these different markets. And yeah, like Katie was saying, I mean, these people that we partner with, they're independent contractors. We can't require them to do anything. But the market sustains itself because people are demanding services like these because they need to get from point A to point B.
So it is conceivable that a prospective customer can click on an app looking for service in the Pittsburgh market area and not get a response from a TNC company.
I would say conceivably yes, but that's the beauty of having all these different options. I think that between all of the representatives at this table, if we are all trying to provide as many options as possible to the people, that that individual, if it's not from Lyft or if it's not from Uber, it will be from Yellow X or in that reverse order, you know? So I think that the options of the opportunity to have more options will fill that need.
And I'll just jump in there too. From our perspective, it's much better if somebody opens the app, we want to be able to provide services no matter what time of day, no matter where it is. So something that our company has embraced is a dynamic pricing scheme. It's the same thing that's happening in airlines. It happens throughout the economy. You have supply and demand, and prices fluctuate. And because of our technology, we can in real time increase. We have an algorithm, and it's very technical, and it's beyond me. But in real time, our prices will increase or decrease based on how much supply or demand is there. And we'd much rather have customers open the app and see that prices are a little higher, but still know that they have the ability to get a ride if they like desperately need one. So we've embraced that kind of a structure. But another thing about that also we take a lot of pride in is the fact that we're embedded in every community that we go into. And we just recently actually came to an agreement with the Attorney General of New York, whereby we agreed that we would cap that. It's called surge pricing. We agreed we'd cap that during times of natural disasters or states of emergency, and we donate a portion. We donate our commission during those periods to the American Red Cross. Because we think that's really important. But for us, dynamic pricing is really how we can ensure that our services are reliable, and reliability is the key, and it's kind of the hallmark of our brand.
If I can, Mr. Vice Chairman, I mean, I think the deal with 2 a.m. service is going to be, you know, if it exists, if there's a demand for it, there'll be drivers who will want to make the money to do it, and whether they're incentivized by a lower or higher fare rate or structure, they'll find a way to do it. I mean, there are certainly TNC drivers are going to be just as likely as taxi drivers to find ways to make money and to service the need.
Well, let me that raised an interesting point. Let me ask you a little different question for the other Yellow X company. Is Yellow Cab a 24/7 company?
There are drivers who are out there. I would defer to Mr. Campolongo, but I believe they're pretty much out there 24/7. I mean, they're, you know, advanced reservation solves some of that problem. You know, making sure you have a 2 a.m. taxi by ordering it ahead of time, or a TNC company ordering ahead of time. But there are, generally speaking, taxis sitting at taxi stands pretty much 24/7.
Let me shift our train of thought. I want to go back to the comment on a multiple opportunity or multiple offerings from TNC companies. Is a driver who signs up with the TNC company, is that exclusivity with that particular TNC, or do drivers have the ability to sign up with multiple TNCs to drive?
I think, you know, the issue is going to be if you sign up for Yellow X, are you operating that vehicle and you're signed up for one of the competitors? Well, who are you actually serving, and whose coverage, insurance coverage, is in play, and whose rules and regulations are in play? So I think there's going to need to be some clarity, and it's obviously a regulatory issue, kind of, you know, who are you serving at the time? And I think that's something that we're going to have to work out. I think our view would be, if you're working for us, Yellow X, you can't also be serving Uber or Lyft, because we're going to get sideways at some point if there is an accident or a problem, and I think we want to avoid that at the get-go.
So you would be advocating exclusivity for one TNC in a particular geography?
Well, no, I think it has to be, the driver has to be serving one entity, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Sorry, maybe I misstated that. So the driver is only able to be contracted with one TNC in a particular geography. Is that?
I think not necessarily, but we need to have clarity about who you're driving for at any particular time. And that goes really to this question that was proposed earlier, kind of the, well, how do I know that your personal insurance coverage is on versus a commercial policy is on? So it's kind of a, you know, I think there has to be some delineation of who you're working for.
If I could just add to that, I would just say that from our perspective, any driver that partners with us is an independent contractor. So we would not restrict them from using, we could not restrict them from using other platforms, and it might even be illegal to try to do so.
That's why it's a regulatory issue.
Within our system, we have an agreement with the carriers, and we have a system online that allows the carriers to license their drivers to use our system. And at any point, if that driver decides to work for another company or another application, the carrier can revoke the license, the application license that will now no longer allow the driver to get ride requests. So to answer your question, can they work for multiple carriers? I think somebody had brought up the issue of insurance. If a driver is working for a carrier, they're going to be under that insurance, and I don't think they should be able to work for multiple TNCs at a time.
I just have one last question. This was prompted by Mr. Middleman, your comment on inspecting personal vehicles for other TNC companies. Can you elaborate on that? I guess I'm just trying to make sure I understand clearly how the inspection process is working for TNC vehicles and why one TNC would be inspecting a vehicle for another TNC company.
Yeah, let me clarify that. Yellow X had two folks who were driving for a competitor bring the vehicles to Yellow X to become drivers for Yellow X. And when we put the vehicles up on the Lyft, there were mechanical deficiencies found in the vehicles that had previously been in service with competitors. That was, we're not inspecting vehicles for the competitors. These were vehicles that were going to be put into use with Yellow X. And there were mechanical deficiencies found, and the vehicles had previously been used for competitors. If that makes sense.
So the inspections for the other TNCs are, what is the physical inspection that the other that the TNCs are doing?
Well, we rely on state inspections, which in Pennsylvania are actually quite rigorous, and all vehicles are inspected at a state level.
I would also add that part of, with Lyft is the element of real-time accountability, and that's through the driver and passenger rating. And that's just not on the performance of the driver, that's of the overall experience in the vehicle itself. So one example that I think is kind of interesting to point out is that vehicles can get inspected and have a very rigorous inspection process, but things break in vehicles. I mean, it just happens, and it could be as simple as a safety belt, for example. So if you take two parallel situations in which a passenger gets into two cars are inspected, they go through a very rigorous inspection process, and they all pass because everything is okay. Well, a week later, something could break, just because that's natural, that happens, right? So a TNC, if we're taking a TNC situation in which a passenger gets into a vehicle, and let's say the safety belt is broken, right? Because that happens, something just goes wrong. That person can, first of all, terminate that ride immediately. But either way, that person provides feedback immediately through their application that we receive, and that car, that driver will be removed from the platform until it is proven that situation has been fixed. So there are these other elements in terms of real-time accountability that come into play, that this feedback can be received and action can be taken immediately. Because I think that this notion that in one inspection at one point is going to cover a vehicle for the entire year is a little inaccurate. And having these measures to continuously check on the process is important.
Am I understanding you correctly that you're advocating for more than an annual inspection of vehicles?
No, I'm encouraging that the commission look at different ways in which these things can be checked and look and you know, there was discussions before about a need for potentially a survey. You know, this real-time accountability, these rating systems are essentially a continuous survey by the public and by the users.
Look, I think that if I understand the Vice Chairman's question, you know, the passengers aren't going to crawl under the car. They're not going to inspect the muffler. They're not going to inspect the tread depth. They're not going to inspect the brake pads and things like that. I think the position that Yellow X has is that those things need to be looked at on a regular basis. And again, it's a regulatory issue, you know. A yearly inspection is not enough for a vehicle that's put into commercial use. It may be okay for the minivan or a sedan or whatever that's being used kind of as a personal car. But if you're going to put a vehicle into what is, you know, arguably commercial use here in a TNC, I think there has to be some requirement for physical inspection of the vehicle on a more regular basis. And that's frankly why we put these vehicles up on a lift and look at them.
If I could just add, I think that what we're talking about here and what TNCs provide is the opportunity for drivers who aren't necessarily folks that are going to be commercial drivers for, you know, day in, day out, to come on the system and earn a little supplemental income. And I think it would be inappropriate to treat their personal vehicles as a commercial vehicle. And maybe, I mean, if that's a legitimate concern, then maybe a better approach would be to consider inspecting all personal vehicles, you know, at a state level more than annually. Because, granted, you cannot check, as Katie was saying, you cannot predict when things are going to break down. And from our perspective, these folks are not, you know, they should not be subjected to the same commercial standards because it's a different business model.
If I may, and I don't mean to be argumentative here, but they are using the vehicle for commercial purpose, and that they are in service. They are putting the general public into the vehicle and using that vehicle for commercial service. Isn't there an expectation that that vehicle is sound, is safe, and the obligation, at least in my mind, is beyond just a personal obligation? This is now a commercial obligation that seems to be a higher standard than just a personal obligation.
Absolutely, and I think we take that very seriously, and the accountability that you know, our customers expect as a level of safety that's far above and beyond what else is out there on the marketplace.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I just want to pick up two quick questions, and we'll pick up on Commissioner Cawley's quote. He sparingly approved the Uber Lyft application, and for the record, I sparingly approved the Yellow X application. And why? Well, to date, you're not in service. The second point is, now that you've brought this issue of these two vehicles coming in for inspection, if I understand it correctly, these drivers were potentially coming to work for your TNC.
Yes.
Okay. And so, to Commissioner Whitmer's point, are you leasing vehicles, or are you allowing people to bring their independently owned vehicles into this new TNC? How does that work?
Well, as we set forth in our application, we lease their personal vehicle from them for the time that it's in service. Okay. So that for the Commission's purposes, we have control of that vehicle because, as you're aware, one of the requirements right now is that the vehicle be owned by the certificated carrier or leased by the certificated carrier. So that's what we're doing there. And we are in service with, I believe, either 8 to 10 Yellow X drivers who are using the platform, and we were just granted our tariff, I think, 20-some days ago. So we're kind of beta testing, and the last thing we want to do, frankly, Mr. Chairman, is to have you stand on the courthouse steps and hit our app and ask for a service that doesn't go as smoothly as we'd like it to do. So I think the commission would understand why that's a concern.
Yeah, and that's a good point. I mean, that's fair enough. You're testing it from a beta perspective. But on the other side of the ledger, the vehicles that you have in service as a regulated cab company, you heard it from the prior panel loud and clearly. There are a set of constituents out there that are not happy with the options they have. And your client that you represent, there seems to be a void there, and we're hearing that.
And if I may, Mr. Chairman, I mean, that's why we were out in front, came to the commission and said, look, okay, let's get a TNC company up and running in experimental service and move forward to address this. I mean, there are a number of people, if I may, who, are still people who are probably, my parents' age. They don't have an app, phone, super duper internet connect. They know about the telephone. And so, the taxi business, as opposed to TNC, still services an enormous number of people, and it is a cornerstone for a lot of transportation. But I grant you, my client is trying to move forward as expeditiously and as lawfully as possible to fill the void. And we're inordinately appreciative of the chairman and the commissioners and staff who have helped us get where we all think we need to go, which is to serve the public in a safe and reliable manner. So I couldn't agree with you more. We're moving to fill the void.
Great. I want to pick up on some kind of late-breaking news. Last night, the California General Assembly moved forward with Assembly Bill 2293, and thanks to this device here, speaking of technology, they have set forth, in addition to the $1 million of insurance policy coverage for your drivers, they have set forth a new requirement of $200,000 in coverage once the driver turns on the application. Like to get your thoughts on that. As I read the press release last night, both of your companies have support and now support those new coverage limits, $1 million, and now a new coverage limit of $200,000 when the coverage once the driver turns on the application. So that would go to the stage 1 scenario.
Sure, I'll take the first pass at this one. Yes, so 2293 did just recently pass. We were both Lyft and Uber were very involved in working with the state legislature and the bill's sponsor to work on a bill that would really work first and foremost for the consumers and the drivers, but also for the companies and the state, obviously. One thing to point out, so Lyft has a policy that is a $1 million insurance liability policy that covers our drivers when they are engaged in commercial activity. So that's from the moment that a ride is accepted and that passenger then that driver is en route to the passenger, then when they pick up the passenger to the moment that ride is complete. And those are commonly referred to as stages 2 and 3. Now, prior to that time in which commercial activity is actually taking place, there's been a lot of discussion about that, and that is when an application is technically on, but there's no commercial activity happening. It is, our belief that this is a period of time in which a personal coverage comes into play, and every, obviously, driver that drives with Lyft has to have proof of their own personal policy coverage, and we also take note of when that sets to expire so that we can get proof of renewal before that happening. So this coverage policy that you're referring to in California is a contingent policy. So in the event that a personal policy lags or is denied for whatever reason, there is this coverage area that is in place. I think that one thing that's important to note that was mentioned previously, and I apologize, I can't recall by who, is that this is an evolving process, and particularly as it comes to insurance. And I think that what we are seeing and what we are seeing now and we will very much see in the future is we hope is that the insurance industry will develop new products, and we are working very closely with some insurance companies to do just that, to, for example, provide a personal policy that is specific to those individuals who wish to be drivers for TNCs. So I think that soon enough, hopefully there will be these offerings that will resolve a lot of these questions, but in the meantime, this seems to be one solution.
I also want to commend you. You picked up on a point about GHG reduction, and for not a question but a compliment. Most people don't realize here in the state of Pennsylvania, since the passage of the Clean Air Act in 1990, 2 parts of our state have been in non-attainment areas for tailpipe emissions: Pittsburgh and Philadelphia. So as you guys continue to ramp up your operations, I agree with you, from societal benefits to DUI reductions to overall environmental benefit. I commend you for putting that out there in the public eye, that this is a serious discussion, and you guys are meeting a societal, there is societal benefit to your service.
Thank you, Chairman. And if I may, just one more bit of information. So San Francisco happens to be our oldest market, and so it's kind of our beta testing for new offerings. And we actually recently just launched Lyft Line, which is essentially a carpooling element of Lyft. So what you can do, because what we found is that 90% of the times the rides that take place on the platform occur pretty much within the same route, starting within 5 minutes of each other, of the start and destination. So what we've been able to do is, what you can now do is you can request a Lyft and you put in your destination, and then you'll then be matched up with somebody else who is going in that same direction, and it's guaranteed within 5 minutes, because we don't want to inconvenience people too much. But I think that what this really shows is the evolution of where we hope to get to, and our commitment to really developing a platform that will allow people to fill those empty seats on the roads, and to really make a significant impact in reducing the reliance on single vehicle rides and ownership.
Thank you. I have no further questions. Do we, colleagues, a second round, if anybody would like to ask a question?
I have just one comment and maybe a question. Your Lyft line, if you're thinking about coming to Pennsylvania with that, be aware we do have, in fact, a ride share statute that you might want to take into consideration before you start down the road.
Yes, thank you.
I would like to talk a little bit, we talked a little bit about vehicle integrity and driver integrity, and one of the things, Ms. Kincaid, that you had indicated in your testimony was to be careful about the age requirement, and that's something that we have a rulemaking on. What would you suggest would be a reasonable time frame that, if we were to look at further changes on our vehicle age requirements, that from a restriction perspective, what should we take into consideration, or what kind of a age limit would you put on a vehicle?
Sure. Well, the limit that we have imposed across all markets is that the vehicle needs to be 2000 or newer, and we have found that to be quite sufficient. What we want to do is, we want to make sure that we have, the highest of standards. We don't want to, as a result, accidentally preclude anybody from getting involved who might really want to be able to participate this. And when you start putting certain restrictions on year, that a year make or what have you, you might really be cutting out certain portions of populations that maybe they don't have like a brand new car, but that car is still in phenomenal shape. They could have only driven, there could be very few miles on that. So there are so many factors that go into that.
One last question?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your indulgence. Regarding driver background checks, we talk about having, a 3-year background check. Would there be something that you suggest be different about that? 7 years, 5 years? What are you doing currently?
So we provide a 7-year background check that looks at a multi-state, county, and federal. It also cross-references with the National Sex Offender List, and we check for DUIs. So, I mean, from our standpoint, safety and accountability and all these things are integral to our brand. So we take every step necessary as a business to certify that, our partners are safe and that our riders can have confidence in them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have Act 33, Act 34 compliance. I think, look, the issue from our perspective with vehicles and with driver qualifications is the safety of the riding public. So in some respects, it doesn't make sense to short circuit that or give it short shrift. So to do background checks and exclude people that have misdemeanors, violent crime, do the national and the local, because sometimes they slip by when you just do the national, and make them pass Act 33, Act 34, so that you're doing the most you can to ensure that the public is safe. And the same thing with vehicles. Again, we're all trying to feel our way through this. Taxi cabs, most companies are, subject those vehicles to pretty rigorous mechanical upkeep because they have an investment in the vehicle. Then it makes more sense to keep it on the road as long as you can. Personal vehicles, some people change the oil at 5,000 miles and some do it at 15. And, some people get the brakes checked all the time and some don't. So one of the things that you have to be mindful of, I think, and certainly the commission is again, vehicle safety. So the age issue is really, presently there's 8 years in the taxi side of things. Maybe it isn't necessary to have it quite as stringent as the taxi side of it, but I think there still has to be a thoughtful, as the commissioner points out, a thoughtful process of determining what actually makes sense. 8 years, 200,000, 100,000. I think in our application, it's 100,000 miles that is the limiting factor for vehicles, and that was done with consideration of the amount of upkeep and mechanical care that those vehicles are going to get compared to one that's in full-time service.
Okay, and now I'm going to recognize Commissioner Cawley and then go over to Vice Chairman Coleman. Commissioner Cawley.
We've had much to say this morning about one of the reasons the legislature gave this commission a long time ago jurisdiction over taxi cabs and limousine service, and that is safety. But the legislature also gave us jurisdiction for a couple other reasons. Number one, to ensure that customers were not price gouged, and therefore there's tariffing of prices. And the second reason was to ensure there would not be discrimination in service, so that those who sought service from a common carrier, a public utility, a taxi cab, or a limo, that they would be rendered service on a non-discriminatory basis. So this is the panel I really should ask. Number one, is allowing so-called dynamic pricing or surge pricing consonant with the mandate that we not allow price gouging? And secondly, should our TNC regulations, if we pass them, or if a law is passed, should there be provision that even though someone may be rated as a poor customer, still deserve and in fact must be given service on a non-discriminatory basis? In other words, can you refuse to respond to an app call, even though as a customer you have received a poor rating for one reason or another, which you probably don't know, have any idea has been, you probably have no idea that you have been given such a rating. I don't know, you'll have to tell me, but. So the two questions are, again, is price gouging and non-discriminatory service, should they still be a part of TNC service in Pennsylvania?
If I may, Mr. Commissioner, the tariff that we had approved by the commission allows for surge pricing with a cap. Because one of the issues is certainly exactly what you said. I mean, if you have a football game going on, and God forbid we'd be playing the Eagles, and there would be huge demand for service, you know, is it going to be a $50 flag drop to get a TNC? Our position was, in conjunction with discussions with the commission and staff, that, you know, there ought to be a cap to it, that there ought to be a certain amount of flexibility for pricing, but that there ought to be a limit to just how far it can go. The issue of, you know, discriminatory service, I think that, again, the gravamen of the Public Utility Commission is to ensure that there's service for everybody on an equal basis. So, you know, it is kind of counterintuitive that you would have a regulatory process that would allow for discrimination based on, you know, whether you tipped or didn't tip, or whether you know, you got a bad driver rating from somebody. You know, in some circumstances, what we don't want to have is we don't want to have passengers and drivers being rated on the basis of overpaying fares so that they can make sure that they get top priority. I mean, it's just it's a problem that needs to be addressed, obviously.
I would say that from our perspective, as I alluded to earlier, there are certain circumstances where we completely agree that it's inappropriate, that the public interest is best served by not escalating rates beyond what the market would normally dictate, such as emergency situations and states of emergency and natural disasters. However, on your other point to football games, to peak times of high demand, those are precisely the moments when there's a lack of services on the road, and we use dynamic pricing to incentivize our independent contractors, who we cannot force to be out on the road, to come on and to meet the demand. What we do on the consumer-facing side, we have a lot of things that are in there as safeguards against or for them. We're very transparent in our prices. You have to acknowledge that surge is happening. You're told multiple times that the prices are increased. You actually have to enter into your phone that you accept the higher prices, and we also have a feature that says you can be notified when those prices return to normal. So we hardly consider it price gouging. It's just effectively allocating resources in the marketplace. And to the point about discrimination, again, like I said, these are independent contractors, so we can't require them to pick anybody up. But what we do is we go through we naturally review all of our data, and when we start to see unusual patterns of repeat refusals to accept a ride or cancellations or things such as that, then we will investigate those, and we have the power to take that person off of our system. We don't allow tipping in our system. Tipping is not part of our practice. Our drivers don't expect to be tipped. They tell customers when they're offered a tip that they don't have to do that. If they insist, then they'll take tips, but it's certainly not anything that factors into our rating process. So that's not one of the considerations.
And also, just to clarify, should a passenger decide to give a driver a little bit more than what was suggested, that has no impact on the rating. The driver finds out after the fact. This is also just a safety mechanism that's built into that. So the rating is purely based off of the interaction. And I would also say, just about kind of the availability and the element of dynamic pricing. on our model, that similarly, that is used as an incentive to try to incentivize drivers to make themselves available. And that only comes into play when there is a spike in demand that is not met by the current supply. Again, with our long-term vision being that this is ultimately something that everyone participates in and is a much more fluid process, that naturally will go away because there will always be enough of the supply out there.
Commissioner, you'd like a follow-up, and then my vice chairman is holding.
Okay, just as a follow-up, this is not about tips. This is not about, my second part of my question is not about tips. My question is as a condition of becoming a driver, an independent contractor, can't you impose the obligation to serve people on a non-discriminatory basis? And what I worry about is how do you police the fact that someone who is an independent contractor may choose simply not to serve somebody because they've gotten bad ratings in the past under the system as I understand it. And in fact, I wonder, does the person know he's gotten bad ratings or she's gotten bad ratings?
Your Honor, within our system, the drivers don't know much more beyond the rating that the riders have received. And you're right. If a rider gets a low rating, do they know they have a rating like that? Within our system, no, they don't. But generally, carriers rate these drivers as they seem fit. If they get a rider that consistently has bad behavior, they're going to get rated with bad behavior. And I don't know if you want it to have an impact, but it does.
Frankly, I'm not so much worried about the drivers. I'm worried about passengers being discriminated against for one reason.
Well, I was saying
If
the
I
riders
can.
would get the rating. But go ahead.
If I can, Your Honor, the law, and it's the Victor case, which was a limo case, state Supreme Court. If you have an independent contractor who is following regulatory requirements, they still retain the independent contractor status. So you can have an independent contractor where we get into these issues of what's the degree of control that would make them an employee, and that's a whole different can of worms. But if the commission has a regulation that says there shall be no discriminatory service, then the certificated carrier can enforce that and not run the risk of employer-employee relationships. So to your point, I think that the commission can absolutely require non-discriminatory service, and it can be enforced by the carrier, if that answers your...
And if I may, Lyft is very clear about zero tolerance in terms of discrimination. I think that there are candidly two things at hand here. There is a discrimination based off of a rating system, and if someone continuously acts very poorly as a passenger, then yes, their ratings will suffer. And yes, they might not be picked off by the first person, the first driver that is pinged with the closest driver, but that will then go to the next driver and then a next driver, and they'll still have a very strong likelihood of being picked up by somebody. So there's that. In terms of, looking at, as we looked at, as Nick mentioned, the cancellation rate, you can also look at that. So if there is somebody who is continuously canceling and maybe from certain requests or certain areas, that can be noted and action can be taken. That I can't say, I don't know, always happens for the more traditional forms of transportation options, in which case, if there is elements of discrimination, how is that reported? How can anybody take action on that?
Vice Chairman Coleman.
I wanted to circle back to the driver background checks, and I'm just curious of the maintenancing of those background checks going forward, and an obligation of drivers to self-report to you traffic citations, criminal indictments, whatever it may be, and at what point do you say, you're done, you can no longer drive for my company?
I'm going to have to get back to you on some of the more specifics because I don't want to misrepresent exactly what we do, but we do have a routine background check, and I believe all of our drivers are supposed to self-report all those things. We take these things very seriously. Our brand depends on people knowing that they can trust the people that are driving them around. So these are things that we don't take lightly by any means.
Commissioner Whitmer.
Mr. Zabriskie, following up on something I noted in your testimony, on page 3, you indicate that that Uber has the ability to provide services in underserved neighborhoods, and I think that is something that is very important to me, and I believe to all my colleagues, making sure that where there are underserved areas that you're going in and doing that. And you've noted that some experience in Boston with 25% of the trips occurring in areas where households, in some that are below the median income. Wondering if you have any sorts of statistics yet for the Pittsburgh area, or for Pittsburgh rather.
I don't know that we do have that kind of data yet. I mean, it takes a while to really develop these things. I will certainly look into it. I'd love to provide that back. Anecdotally, I mean, not anecdotally, but in Chicago and other markets, I mean, Chicago, for example, we've seen 4 out of 10 rides starting or ending in neighborhoods that the city itself has labeled traditionally underserved by taxi. So I think we have a good body of evidence that we're building that will bear that out in Pittsburgh as well, but I don't know that we have it.
Okay. And I would just note that Eagle fans don't travel all that well, so we don't probably have to worry about it.
Well, let me wrap up. We're a little bit over time. I want to take this opportunity to thank the panelists. And Nick, as a customer, I will give you another shout out as a Philadelphia Eagles fan. More recently, what you did from a corporate citizen perspective, helping school supplies in the school district of Philadelphia. These are the things that you guys are innovating to provide. Now, I haven't done the ice cream thing yet, but I've seen that. To commend you there and what you're doing, getting civically engaged in the communities in which you're doing business.
Thank you very much. That's very much important to us. We appreciate that.
With that, we will get into our next panel.